Right, Dan, go on. So, yeah.
Right. Good evening. We have two legends of the Lancashire BMX scene here. We have Alan of Alan's BMX, and we also have John Lee, aka the Seat Postman.
Indeed.
Good evening. I'm going to let you guys ramble on in a minute once I finish introduction, but yeah, you guys pretty much have lived and breathed BMXing for probably longer than most people have been around. Would you agree?
Certainly. I mean, I was certainly around the very beginning, as was Alan. But Alan has stuck with it right the way through because obviously we are in Alan's BMX shop. Alan has been buying and selling BMX bikes since 1980.
Well, a little bit before that, but we didn't set the company up until 1981.
Right. So there's been an Alan's BMX shop in the Wigan area for 40 years now, Alan, would that be right?
40 years, yeah.
So Alan has been through the whole generation of BMX, right, old school, when Alan used to race, right through the mid-school and right through to modern day BMX. So I met Alan through BMX.
So how did we...
It was at Chorley track.
I know, but how did you know, we know that and we know about Charlie and the Super Shoot and everything else, but how did we actually,
it's difficult,
how did we connect?
I mean, modern days you would do this, you would just Google it and you would just make a connection and it would happen. It must have been through your shop. It must have been. My dad must have heard there was a shop in Hindley, because there wasn't many BMX shops, was there? I mean, how many shops were there, Alan, then? There was Scaresbrick Cycles over in Southport.
Yeah.
And yourself. I don't actually know of any others.
But the fine Mr. Dennis Christian.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was, but there were so few shops. But I think what actually happened, my dad started building a BMX track in Chorley. Alan was also at the point of building the Three Sisters BMX track as well, but it hadn't quite got that far, had it? We were kind of ahead. We were a bit further ahead with the track. So then Alan basically paid a visit. Somehow there was a connection made. Alan paid a visit to Chorley with his dad Arthur and some of your team riders as well. I remember there was Dave Arnold that was there, probably Craig as well, Craig Burrows. And so that was my first meeting ever with Alan at Chorley BMX track when it was really in its infancy.
And of course, because it was on private land, we didn't need to go the process that we were going through with Three Sisters was the whole thing of going through the council and getting the funding and everything else. And obviously, with the quarry,
it was private.
It was ready to go, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, we could do what we wanted. There was no paperwork involved, especially with my dad anyway. But this was at a time when there was no BMX tracks. There was bikes, and you could buy a bike and buy all the kit, but you couldn't race because there was no tracks. There was no clubs, there was no tracks. So all this was just at the very, very cusp, at the very beginning of when BMX started. It was, and we were just making it up as we went on, weren't we? I mean, but I was getting to the point where we did a couple of races at the track, and then Alan actually sponsored me. Alan was my very first sponsor on a Robinson, and then I got to go to the shop, which was actually this first shop was in Hindley, and I was 15 at the time. Alan was 16, I think. But at that point, Alan was importing. He was 16 years old, businessman. He was importing bikes from America. He was making all the connections. Had you been to America at that point?
Well, how it started was we raced motocross from when I was 11, so we already had like JT racing stuff, and we had helmets, and we had all the stuff. All you needed to create a BMX uniform was Vans.
Yes.
So and then we had them. So we had everything already in stock. So if you look at photographs from 1980 and beginning of 1981, everybody else has got skateboard helmets, but we've all got all the stuff
kit
on because we already had it. And I remember I picked up an issue of BMX Action magazine, and I think it was summer 1918. Picture of John Cruise on the cover on a red line, and I bought it from Smith's on Main Street.
Right.
And I wrote to all the brands in that magazine, which was, GT, small company, Robinson, all these brands. And I didn't say that I was like 16. I just typed it up I remember typing it up on the typewriter and then typing Alan's BMX and then signing it, and I wrote underneath, as you would in America, because I'd had one reply and I just wrote President. And my dad's you don't do that here. So I was president even then at 16.
But you were 16 years old.
So, it was nothing. So we just, and we'd had some, we were trading at the motocross track, which then became quite a big kind of a thing later on, didn't it? But at that time, I remember my dad had a car garage and he could get NGK spark plugs and he could get oil. So we were on 2 strokes, 80s, 100s, 125s. And you go through 3 plugs a meeting. And everyone was running Castrol R then, R30, R40, and it was, anyway, without going into that, it was, on a little too small cylinder 2-stroke. They just used to gas up all the time, didn't they? And we got Bellray MC1, which was, it was 100-to-1 ratio.
My God.
But listen, we never had any failures. But anyway, so I remember going to the track and we had the van and I got some Fablon, sticky back paper, and just got a marker pen and wrote NGK B9 EV and Bellray MC1, and we got a crate of oil and a box of spark plugs, sold them, and I was like 11 or 12, and then we would then sell that and made the money on it, and then we'd buy some more oil and some more plugs, and then we started to do the stuff properly at the track. So that's how we managed. That's how by the time I got to 16,
you understood the system.
Yeah, I was able to go. Yeah, we need Chuck Robinson wrote back and we were like, we'll have some frames. He goes, well, I've got 12. I'm like, shit, we'll have them.
Yeah.
And I had, I don't know how much though, a few £100 to be able to buy them, and we must have wired the money or something. I don't know, wired the money or something, and then we drove down to Heathrow and picked them up. I'm sure there was a door-to-door service then, but no, we drove to Heathrow and slept in the van and then brought the frames back, and that's how they would have been the frame that you had and Dave Arnold and Craig and everybody else had. Yeah. So it wasn't just 1981, I was 16 and then started. I'd been doing it for a few years with the race, and it just helped to pay for our bikes and racing really. Do you know?
Yeah. Yeah, well, quite a natural thing then, I guess, just to just have a little shift across into BMX and off you go. But like I was saying, Alan, was my first ever sponsor, and again I was 15, and just a great time to be racing. Again, we were making it up as we went along. We get to a track and we didn't know.
We
just go to a track, ride around. I don't really remember practicing that much. You just race, get on the start line and go, and it's so different to now. But we'll get into that a little bit later on, I think. But we've got a couple of bikes here, bikes that Alan and I used to ride. I rode for Alan for a season. I think I did a season on Robinson, and then more or less I was sponsored. I got a sponsorship from Raleigh, from the factory. So this is one of my old bikes. It's not quite set up as Alan's is. Alan's is set up perfectly. Really, this is a genuine.
You rode that through the period. This is a bike that I replicated a few years ago.
Yeah. So, but basically, these are very much old school bikes, very collectible these days. But we were just going to have a chat about some of the components, weren't we? Really, just how bikes have developed from because these when they were out were as good as you're going to get. These were the pinnacle of the sport, and the development of it were. It's progressed, in the last, 35 years from these, or, more, 38 years, to bikes, such as this one here. So, Alan, what do you think, components-wise, what do you think has been the biggest changes?
Well,
the best changes?
I mean, these bikes didn't really change from the early 80s until well into the 90s. They were still running caliper brakes, weren't they? You know, redline flight cranks were still. I mean, people were still, you know, using these profiles not that long ago, weren't they?
Right,
the last 10 years,
yeah.
you know, pros would still be riding a tubular crank. We didn't have, you know, BB30 and like Shimano DXR type system. We probably did then, didn't we? But you know, it was for a long time. These bikes didn't change at all. You know, we still had threaded forks. God damn them, and the only change really from 1980 to the mid 90s was longer top tube, longer rear end. Yeah. So the bikes got longer. I mean, these are.
Well, this was. I don't know how it took so long for that to happen. One thing with one of the massive differences between these bikes and this race bike here is like Alan was saying, is the length of the top tube. Basically, these bikes have no rider area at all. You know, there are 6 feet, you know, men riding these bikes, and you're just banging your knees into the handlebars. They're so short. They're always so short.
It's insane now. Tim March raced on like a Kuwahara with an 18-inch top tube.
Yeah, well, Tim was one of, if not the tallest rider in the 80s.
And to put that in perspective, that's the size of a frame that like an 8 or 9 year old would be riding today. So, I mean, obviously we've all got a lot of respect for Tim, but even more so when I put it in perspective and thought of...
He was riding a mini.
So if he was racing now, he'd be on a bike with a 23-inch top tube or a 20-inch. Or did he make, you know, now for these supercross tracks, maybe they have longer bikes still, I don't know, but it'd be at least 23-inch top tube.
Yeah,
so it's 5 inches longer than that bike. And not just the front end, but the back end as well.
Well, the whole geometry, it's just set up now. I mean, I rode this bike a few years ago on a track just to have a little ride on it, and then I jumped on a modern bike, and it was just chalk and cheese. It was just, these are just wobbly dinosaurs, really. You know, modern race bikes are so pure. You know, they're stable, they're incredibly light. They're better in every respect. You know, I can't think of one thing where this would even, unless you just like the look of an old bike, you know, these bikes are lighter, stiffer, faster, stronger. But I suppose that leads us into what these bikes were made for. You know, these old bikes were never made for the kind of tracks that are out now. You know, I mean, this takes us into modern tracks. So what are your views on modern tracks, Alan? What do you think of the whole modern era of riding?
Yeah, I mean, it's just evolution, isn't it? And I think since clip pedals came in and BMX was introduced to the Olympics, and there has been a lot more track influence. And then because of the Olympics, if you look at the tracks before BMX came into the Olympics, which was 2008, and I think it was announced 2006.
Yes.
Then you can see, you know, more tarmac berms, you know, bigger start hills, things really changing because, you know, there was an Olympic development program, and then there was a pathway to being an Olympian. So everything really changed. So if you think of how the bikes have changed from 2006 to now, probably, you know, by then I think we had DXR cranks in maybe 2007, so not far off that, you know, that changed, and then we started to get different types of press fit bottom brackets. We definitely had carbon composite forks at that point, and obviously all the bikes were 1 1/8 inch threadless, you know, certainly by then. We hadn't got tapered head tubes forks, which obviously come from mountain biking. And then subsequently, I suppose, it's the and the last thing was the disc brake. And the other thing that is you can any layman would be able to tell the difference between is obviously the bloody tyres.
But again, that's going back to tarmac berms.
And the preparation of the tracks. I mean, you know, as awesome as Charlie was and Witoff and all the tracks that we raced in 81, 82, 83 were all, you know, were mostly amazing and would still be good today. You needed to have more traction, didn't you? So obviously, and we were just touching on this, higher tyre pressures, and the emphasis on speed. And I think there also was a point, and there probably is still now, John will know better than me, where we've got tyres have gone narrower, so we would be running then a 2.125 or at least a 175, but usually a 2.125 front tyre, a 175 tyre on the rear. That was the standard setup, 175, 125. And now, for full-size riders, 1.6, 1.5, 1.75 on the front at the most.
Some riders do. I think some of the Americans do run bigger tyres, but you're right. A 175, which we would have classed as quite a skinny tyre.
Yeah, that'd be a rear tyre. Yeah, then.
Are a full size tyre now for the tracks. But obviously, going back to what you were saying about the tarmac berms, as soon as you introduce a tarmac berm, you then don't take your feet off anymore. You don't take your feet off. So obviously, that's why the clipless pedals. It completely. As soon as you don't take your foot off in a corner, the racing's different. It's completely different because it's not as you can't block with when you take your foot off. You can't widen yourself when you take. Because we used to do that. We go into a turn. If you knew there was someone on the inside, you could take your foot off and push it way out, and they just banged into your leg. I mean, you just block them with your leg. Well, now that's not a thing anymore. But the corner speed now must be 4 times what we used to do because a lot of our corners. If some corners were flat, we raced on track with flat corners. There was no berms. Sometimes it was off camber. We've raced on tracks with off camber turns where that would be just ridiculous now. I mean, that would just be completely.
You'll be talking about uphill straights next.
Well, so it's so different. But where I'm sort of seeing it from is, my background is very much I'm stuck in the 80s and early 80s at that. And then when I stopped racing in 85, because Alan was strangely, he was my first ever sponsor and he was my last ever sponsor as well. And my last bike I rode was a Torker that Alan imported too. So that was my last season in 85 on Torker. And then I left the sport. I really just left the sport. And I only came back into it when my children started showing an interest much more in the noughties. And by that time, it was very much new school. And I couldn't believe the bikes. I couldn't believe what had happened in that. There's just a shift, just a massive shift. Where now I think it's got to the point where it's getting to refinements. I think now, like you were saying, Alan, there are just refinements in through axles. You mentioned disc brakes. Bikes are beginning to look a bit samey, I would say, really. But incredible shift. And for me, with my children started riding, my 2 oldest children. So we're now, we've gone full circle where Alan actually sponsors my two oldest children. This is Jason's bike here. He was national number 25 last year. Kira achieved something I never did, and that was she achieved national number 1. So I think my best national was 3. How many times were you national number 1, Alan?
Just once, John.
Really? Wow, I thought it was more than that.
Yeah. Well, something to do with that tall guy on the 18-inch top
right,
bike.
Yeah, I guess. But I mean, to achieve a national, a national 1 is and always was a massive achievement. It's huge. To even run a single-digit number is a massive achievement. But it takes a lot of effort. And going back to tracks as well, going back to modern tracks. When we crashed these, generally we just fell off. I just remember we did go to hospital a few times, didn't we, Alan?
4 broken collarbones. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, again. Yeah, I think I had 2 broken collarbones and a couple of broken wrists. But when you see the tracks nowadays, they're rock hard. They're rock hard and really, really fast. And you're clipped in. Maybe I'm looking at it from a point of view as being a father now, and I look at it differently. But to achieve a good result now, you have to have a bit of luck going with you in terms of injuries. Where one injury in a season, and that's your season gone. where I think we could get away with a little bit more in the past because the tracks were softer and slower. But yes, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how much clipless pedals have played in the part of injuries. I mean, I've discussed this with people a lot over the last few years, but
there's no shattered shins, though, is there, with no bare track pedals?
Well, yeah, I mean that was only cosmetic, wasn't it? Really,
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't wear shin pads, and I mean, these are, I had hutch pedals on the race bikes, really, and I've got them on my Talker now, but I don't know whether there's, I've no evidence to be able to prove it, but it just feels like, for me riding clipless pedals on a mountain bike, although your pedals are obviously connected and you can adjust them, the floats, or how much you're able to come in and out of them, somehow it just feels like it's harder to get your hands off the handlebars as well. I don't know, and like I say, I've got no evidence collated to be able to prove this, but it just feels like you're more connected to the bike, and I think that the higher speed and the fact that you're going 30 mile an hour or more, and if you jumped out of a car at that speed, you'd hurt yourself, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and as John said about the corners, I mean, this has been discussed over and over. There'd been multiple lines, and I know nowadays you can do, high-low techniques and all those types of moves in turns. It's probably more inventive than we had someone going wide in a berm and someone just... Because you'd literally have someone taking an arc like this, and somebody else would just literally go as close to the inside as they could, just to be able to take them out. Whether if you got it right, you'd take their front wheel away. Thanks, Tim. And if you didn't, you'd just T-bone them. And also, there wasn't the commissioners at the side of the track, like with refereeing it like a football match. If something happened, unless you were actually punching somebody.
Well, I mean that is something. There was
you wouldn't have that, but like now I've in the later noughties when we were running the team, incidents where someone had maybe come across on somebody, not on the start straight.
No,
we used to have the lanes.
Well, that's
and
gone.
someone would be disqualified.
Yeah,
because somebody's
it's impedance.
Was and that.
That never happened. In the 80s, there was no impedance. I mean, there was, and there literally were fights. There were fights on the finish line. And we're now, I mean, fortunately, I've never seen that in modern times. But if that were to happen now, you'd probably your license would be revoked. Where then, I think, again, we were learning, this sport was so new that I think maybe these rules had to be developed. But like Alan said, there are on the turns, on the straights, there are a lot of like referees looking at if you impeded that rider intentionally to slow them down. So yeah, the rules are a bit tight now, I think.
That's obviously because it's under the auspices of British cycling, isn't it?
Yes,
really,
yeah. It's become more, I suppose, the track cycling influences there with that type of ruling, I suppose. What do you think about? Do you think it's still BMX, Alan? Do you think the sport has developed to a point and evolved to a point where it's its own thing? We call it BMX still.
Yeah, I mean BMX is bicycle motocross, and it isn't bicycle motocross. It's another hybrid thing. Obviously, I've used this analogy before. It's much more like bicycle supermoto.
Yes.
In terms of where we, obviously you've got experience in that.
Yes.
You can probably comment better than me, but it just seems like the way that it's gone. It's a hybrid of road and dirt.
Yes.
Much more. But if you compare motocross in the 1970s or the 1980s compared to motocross now, and if we just forget supercross for a moment, we're just outdoor motocross.
Yeah.
They're still riding the same tracks.
Yeah.
They still race at Hawkstone Park.
Yeah. I guess the jumps have changed though, and
but not tons. I mean, the bikes have developed definitely, but that is still motocross. There's no. I mean, what differences we might have had a concrete start gate and maybe obviously different starting mechanisms rather than elastic band start.
yes.
But we had that in the 80s anyway, so
Yes.
really it hasn't changed. So motocross is still, it's the same thing. So, you know, there's different riding techniques, you know, the scrubbing the jumps and different things like that. So it has evolved, but the actual tracks themselves typically are the same. So that is still motocross. But if you look at BMX being bicycle motocross, and then you look at what it is now, I think we'd be surprised if we saw a video from the Olympics, if we'd have gone into the future in 1981,
And someone had said that's BMX.
we'd have been like, "What the fuck?" Wouldn't we? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess.
But conversely, if you just saw, motocross the nations in 1918 in Belgium or wherever it was, and fast forwarded it to whenever it was last. I don't think they had it this year. Did they have it this year? I don't know. But when they had it last, you'd still be able to relate to it. You know, the bikes have developed a lot, haven't they?
Oh, yes.
And the riding style, more importantly. But the thing that you're doing it on is very, very much the same. So I suppose it beggars the question, and it's something that, you know, we have discussed on and off over the years. It'd be interesting to see, you know, these types of bikes on more of a dirt style track, and to see how that would work. And it'd be interesting to see what the kids,
how they handled it.
the kids thought of it. And obviously I've got my rose tinted glasses on now, but I'm pretty sure they'd like it.
Yeah.
You know, and I know we've had no clips series, but no clips on a modern track, it doesn't make any sense.
It's not much different.
You're all in or you're all out, aren't you?
Yes,
So
yeah.
that to me doesn't make any difference. But I suppose it's for the wider viewer. If you've seen, you know, mountain bike four-cross, that is more what like BMX used to be like.
Yes. Yeah.
And I've often wondered that if we could have something like that somewhere private, like Charlie, and we could build a thing, do a bit of an invite. You couldn't use, you could use them tyres if you wanted, but good luck to you.
Yeah.
I mean, the very first race, I think maybe the very first race we ever did, we didn't think it was muddy enough. So it was actually on the side of a reservoir in Little Lever in Bolton. So we got a bucket and we watered the start till to make it more muddy.
Wow.
Because it wasn't like BMX, it wasn't BMX enough. It was too dry, and what's the fun in that?
Imagine that, yes.
And I know some of these types of events, you know, there was a bicycle supercross thing, wasn't it, that Magoo was involved with, and there was X Games. There was a few big gnarly,
bionic, there was.
A few years ago.
I'll tell you what's interesting with that one as well, because I follow a few of the podcasts, and the races that you are talking about, they have sort of chatted amongst themselves as would they have done that? You know, because a lot of the elite now, the top young elite especially, never raced those particular races, and they said there's no way they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't race it.
Well,
the big, fast dirt, downhill, huge.
Because that brings us down to the question of getting this fine line with a lot of racing. You need a balance of being able to race the competitors, but you're also racing the track, aren't you?
Yes.
So if the track gets too gnarly, it actually makes the racing worse.
Yes.
Because you're on the start line thinking, shit, how am I going to get around this track?
Yeah.
And the races that John's talking about, there was massive chasms, wasn't there?
It was
they're on YouTube, aren't they? And man,
but with downhill, so the speed wasn't a problem. You know, there was no problem with speed.
But there'd be 8-man gate. Or did they have 10-man? They might have had well, whatever it was. So let's say they had an 8-man gate. Like 3 people had finished.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It was literally, it was absolutely, it was brutal. And even some of the tracks that we raced unintentionally, they weren't made to be gnarly. But like the corners, I'm thinking of Whittoff, like the second to there was no prep. I mean, we got to that national and we weeded the track on the Saturday when we got there. And it was overgrown from the previous year when we'd been there.
because it never been used. So this was a track. Yeah, this was the Whittoff Park was to any of the old school people. Whittoff. It was a great track. It was on a hillside in Scotland. It was quite. It was on. There was like some wooden chalets, wasn't there? I don't know if it was like some kind of holiday, kind of touristy thing in the woods. But it was always. I mean, after it was just the venue was fantastic. I always remember the sun was out as well. Did it ever rain there? I don't know, but I just remember the.
No, it was dusty. It was always dusty, wasn't it?
But whoever went to Whittoff Park will never forget that track. But it was so crude, wasn't it? It was a downhill track. Like Alan was saying, it was never used year to year. So when you rocked up the next year, it was exactly the same as it was before, but overgrown. So yeah, it involved. I remember them being like bricks in the berms because the water had washed away the berm, and it was just. But what a great track! What a really great track. Obviously, it had a big set of doubles down the second straight, but it was a downhill track, and
you can't technically have that nowadays with the regulations. I don't think, can you?
Well, Hartlepool, there was a couple. It always surprised me when we turn up at a modern track, and there are very few.
But isn't there something to do with like the elevation from the start to the finish? It can only be such a difference. I thought I'd read.
I'm not sure about that one.
Okay.
I've just been my BC race manual.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But generally speaking, the land that's available, or unless it's done intentionally, tends to be flat. So you just get this standardised, serpentine track.
I mean, it does become a little bit homogenised, but that's with anything, isn't it? Whether it's snowboarding or surfing or anything, you're always at this point where this exciting point that John was describing when we were at the birth of BMX in this country, and when we inherited BMX in 1980, it had already developed up to this point. Before this, the bikes were developed from Schwinn Stingrays, weren't they? So they'd gone through a point of having a full suspension bike.
Yes.
Not as a joke, as an actual thing that people actually raced. And when we got these were fully formed, and we'd had 5 or so years of development, hadn't we?
Oh,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
yeah. Well, these are full chrome moly frames. The old frames they bend, and the mild steel was soft. I mean, these are still good quality steel now.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't. I mean, if you look at the welds on these bikes. If you were to make, you'd buy it'd be an S&M, wouldn't it? It'd be high end, and also from what John was saying, people. I mean, we did a collaboration this year as a 40th anniversary with S&M, and we had 40 frames made, which are chrome moly, and we'll get it. We'll cut in a shot of one, and. John and Carl, who ride for us in the vets in the over 50s 20-inch Anning Cruiser, they're riding those chrome moly bikes, and they're really closely related.
Yes.
To these, aren't they?
Well,
I suppose.
And John won the championship.
Yeah.
On a chrome moly, he won national number one on a chrome moly frame, which is harking back. Although modern geometry. It's harking back to these days. Interestingly, John ran, and you're aware of this, Alan, because going back to components. Obviously, when we were around with these the old school bikes, they were caliper brakes, and they just didn't work. They just didn't work. It's simple. You could set them up as best you could. You could use the best brake pads, but they just, especially on wheels on. Skyway wheels as well, and nylon wheels, they just wouldn't work. There's some humour in this one because John Bentley obviously wanted to. He was winning the championship last year, and he only had to get a few more points. So he decided to build a bike up that sort of looked back on the old school. So he built it up with Skyway wheels like these. So he built it up with plastic wheels, and very quickly he realised two things. 3 probably, but 2 definitely. The brakes didn't work because they never worked. So even though we're now in 2020, 21, the brakes still didn't work. And they were very flexible as well. due to that, when he found out when he was pedaling, because now the track's faster, tyres grippier, you're putting more strain on the wheels. These wheels were never ever designed to run tyres as grippy as these. So what we actually did, and I helped him out with this, we actually we did a disc brake conversion on the bike. So he actually ran a modern GT carbon frame with Skyway wheels, harking back to the 80s, with a disc on. So he actually had a good brake, and it didn't actually matter that the wheels flex because the brake obviously was on the disc. But I think he only raced a couple of motos with it, and he soon realised that the wheels were so flexy, it was dangerous in the turns. Not too much on the straights, but when he was pushing into the turns, this was in Scotland.
Was the front end pushing?
The bike was just folding. The wheels were folding, and this was, John's not an elite level rider, but he's quick. But yeah, he only did a couple of races, and then he basically switched back to wire wheels and won the championship. So gets an applaud from me. But so yeah, it's very interesting how how the whole evolution of the bikes going again from these. To effectively, this bike, this GT, correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, but Kai White on that frame and fork, I think, certainly on that frame, took a silver at the Olympics on exactly that frame.
And that's really, although, you can spend a lot of money on them, but I still think that if you're going to ride at an elite level, BMX is still one of the cheapest forms of cycling that you can do.
Absolutely.
Not just with downhill and the obvious thing, but even trials or cross country. Cross country, it's 10 grand. And really, 3 grand or something for a bike. I know we've got carbon rims, and they jump. They obviously put the cost up considerably, and we've got some expensive hubs. But effectively, especially the younger age groups, still think, some kid, some 7-year-old could just buy a bike out of the box, and £500 bike out the box, I'm winning a national title on it.
Yeah,
completely. It's probably just sat on the velodrome, and both bikes are probably very similar in very similar respects as well, really, with the velodrome and the BMX, aren't they?
Well, I think what Alan was saying, is a great thing there. I think the actual bike itself doesn't have, for instance, if you're doing downhill mountain biking, if you're at world level, you need the best of the best. You need
this is much in arms racing, downhill and cross country, time trials, road racing.
Yeah, you need the best suspension, you need everything set up properly, where in this game, a race is 40 seconds, 100% effort, 40 seconds. If you can ride a bike, you can just, these aside, you could just jump on probably more or less any bike, and like Alan said, you can be winning nationals. So the rider has, I think, a much greater input into the result than other sports.
Yeah, because obviously when you start talking about motorsport, you start getting into this thing of, you might say Formula One, what percentage of that is the driver and what percentage is the car, and that's probably skewed way the other way. Some other sports, Supermoto or MotoGP probably go, because it's 2 wheels, you're probably coming down again and putting more with the rider and less with the bike, and as you go more like Supermoto and then more towards dirt, you might end up getting to like a parity of 50-50 or something.
But I think the shift on this is, what would you say? 75-25?
Well, providing the bike's set up and it's the right size. I think, if you had this bike made out of chromoly, and obviously John's proved that, but I don't think, obviously as a retailer, I've got to watch what I say here, but, I know carbon forks make the front end lighter, and obviously as you start to go higher and higher towards an elite level, obviously those little gains, again with British cycling, all the little 1%,
incremental gains,
they are
marginal gains.
They all add up, don't they? Taking your own pillow, all that stuff. So it's all it's all important. But I think, just as John's saying, it's a national level. So if some kid just wants to get into BMX and doesn't want to spend, the parents, I mean, we see it here, you know, a kid will just say, yeah, he wants to try, and obviously BMX is very accessible. We've got a lot of tracks around and the pump tracks and everything else. So it's great because it isn't putting the kids under a ton of pressure. So you can buy, I mean, we do GT Mac 1s, I think they're 350 quid, it's under 400 quid anyway. So you could afford for the kid to try that bike and it be the right size. This is pretty critical. Because parents are bloody buggers, aren't they? Going like, oh, buy twos. I'm buying them. He'll grow. You know, which honestly, don't ever do that. But you could afford to like buy the right size bike. Do you fancy going to the track? No, I'm staying in, playing on my thing. Whatever, you know, we've got £400 invested in it. It's not like, you know, we've got a £100,000 motorhome and we've got, you know, 4 motorbikes that are work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it is a very, to get into BMX, it's got to be, you know, in terms of cost-wise, I mean, a lot of tracks have their own, they have rental bikes, you can just literally rock up and
pay a £5 or whatever it is,
a few pounds and you're on the track. You know, and again, second-hand bike market is you know, is booming really. But there again, you need advice, you need to buy the right thing.
Size is I mean, we had someone come in today he bought a bike used, and he was okay actually. And then but you know, it was just like contact points. The seat was a bit crappy, and the grips and bars were a bit scratched. And I started to help him, you know, find economy stuff, because there's no point spending. You pay 50 quid for this bike. There's no point spending 500 quid on it, you know. No. And then I did it all, and then the guy, and I'm like, oh, how old is he or she? And he's like 7. And it was a 20-inch full-size bike, so obviously the bike was too big. Yeah. So, it's a difficult one. But I think from parents getting their head around BMX bikes, I'm not just talking about race bikes now, I'm talking about freestyle bikes. When they see those size wheels, they're like, yo, that's a kid's bike. Do you know what I mean? And so they don't understand, you know, they go, oh, look how low it is. He's only 7, he'll be able to sit on that. So this is really what having a bricks and mortar shop is actually really good for, because when you look at bikes online, you can't really tell that. And obviously, whether it's freestyle or race, really, it's in the length, not in the height, because you're not sat down riding them. And obviously, we do get parents that used to ride BMX and they understand, and probably more so now, really. Well, maybe not. Maybe we're getting into a generation of parents now that have maybe seen, you know, Beth or, you know, Charlotte or Kai in the Olympics and thought this is a good thing. You know, kids can get into this. They're only used to mountain bikes, so when they see 29-inch wheels, you know, and then they see wheels like this, they just think kids bike. Small. And then when you start talking about smaller wheels than that, obviously this is more relevant to freestyle, because, you know, like a 10-year-old would be on an 18-inch wheel bike, and, you know, maybe an 8-year-old on 16-inch wheels. Yeah. So to try and explain that to parents,
it's a lot of information to take in.
It's difficult, but still the same thing applies. You can still, and even more with bloody freestyle. Do you know what I mean? You could, I mean, if you look at like Charlotte's bike from a gold medal at, you know, the Olympics, and she brought it here and everything else, we set it up for her. I mean, the bike's got titanium spokes, but really it's a chrome moly frame, it's a chrome moly fork. The bikes are actually more similar to these, aren't they, really? Yes. So it's a tubular chrome moly crank, which is virtually no different at all from that.
And relatively short as well.
Yeah.
Top tubes. Longer than that,
I think so, 20.4.
Yeah,
so
but not
as long as that.
No,
so those bikes are, you know, really, really, really similar to these. And I would say that providing you got the right size, you know, and obviously bikes are going up, aren't they? But if you had a bike that was full chrome moly, was fully sealed bearings, and the frame size was right, and you had the right tyres on it, any rider would be able to perform, you know, at a really, really high level on that bike, which is mind-blowing isn't it? Really, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, one thing we haven't touched on was the shift from BMX to freestyle or park or street, and there's so many names now. Where when you got a BMX bike in the 80s, that was it. You did everything on it. It was you could do your paper round on it. You could ride it to the track. You could race it.
Have a Stranger Things adventure.
Yeah, you could, but freestyle as well. I mean, when I rode for Rally, I was there really as a racer, but I used to do some freestyle because we all did. It's something.
Yeah, it was BMX.
It was just this encompassing name for what you did on your bike. But then again, slowly, people started focusing more. They weren't really that interested in freestyle, but they liked going to the skate park or doing jumps or doing tricks. And so there was a shift towards freestyle that kind of, I just sort of continued down the racing line, because pretty quickly you realise these guys that are into doing freestyle got good really quick, and that's all they did. There was a few odd people that could do both, like Mike Pardon. There's a couple. But we have a bike. We have a bike around the corner here, haven't we? That kind of really changed everything.
Yeah, which brings us on to this fella, Bob Harrow, who was at the very beginning freestyle BMX, and I remember he was riding for Talker at the time, doing freestyle and doing. There was him doing freestyle. There was Arrol Osborne and Mike Buff, and even when we went in 1981, I remember seeing a guy. When me and Dave Arnold went to California to hook up with Chuck Robinson in Easter 1981, and we met this guy at a track, and he goes, "I don't race, I'm freestyle," and he just did this like. I think we sort of jump on one side of the pedals, invert the bars, and then just drag the bike on the tarmac. And we were like, no way. And that's how Dave. And that's when we came back. Dave got more into freestyle. We didn't call it freestyle then. We didn't really know. And then we were there in 1982 with Steve Johnson, who owned Talker, and they had these distinctive twin top tubes. And it wasn't to use them as a standing platform. It was the like USP, wasn't it, having a twin top tube?
Yeah, the frame design.
And because of that, it became popular freestyle because people would stand on that juncture there around the seat tube. Bob Harrow rode one, and then I remember being there, and we were at Knott's Berry Farm actually. Me and Tony Holland. I said, "Oh, where are you going?" He goes, "I've got a meeting with Bob. He wants to talk about building a frame." And we're like, "Oh, no way." And it was funny really because, and I just kind of went, "Oh yeah, that's interesting." Then he made the frame at first, and they had Talker forks, and then he made the forks, and then obviously Harrow became a massive company. But although John's saying, "Oh yeah, we're involved in, we were in the business," and in 1981, but I never thought, "Oh Harrow, that could be might be worth, might take off that, might it, freestyle?"
Yeah,
do you know what I
mean? And again, what a game changer! What a game changer, because everyone got the American magazines in those days, and suddenly, you've got these guys who could ride so smooth. They were just they were so photogenic, because it always seemed to be California sun, skate parks.
But it was one bike that was like, you'd see people doing what you call flatland nowadays on it.
Yes.
But also riding an upland skate park like miles up in the air on the same bike.
Yes.
And those two things are really, very different things, aren't they?
Oh gosh, yes, yeah. Oh, from flatland, just doing roll bikes and flatland tricks, to riding a skate park. And again, I suppose there's changes now, because there are different bikes now for doing that sort of thing now. Where then freestyle was that. Freestyle was flatland, and freestyle was skate park and ramps. But again, very split from the racing side. It was very much. There were people, like you just said with Bob. I don't race, and I think it's difficult. There aren't too many people now. There are still a couple of people that can ride well in skate parks and race at an extremely high level. But it's few and far between, I think. But this was the bike, this was the bike that changed everything. I remember We were at Earl's Court, I think, when Bob Harrow came over. That would have been about, I don't know, 83? Was it? 82, 83 maybe. But unbelievable. Everyone was flocking to the ramp to watch him ride. Superstar.
But having said that, we're talking about this bike being a game changer, but if you look at the geometry of this bike, and if we'd have had one of our talkers here, it's not really different, is it? Really?
No.
So they haven't done, it hasn't, I haven't looked at the figures, but I bet it's not got like a super steep head angle and very little rake on the forks. I mean, nowadays, an average freestyle bike, it'll probably have a 32mm rake on the fork, and we've now got 15mm. So they are getting really, really steep because of nose manual tricks and stuff that they do. Yeah. So none of this, I don't think geometry-wise, and certainly if you look at the actual tubing, the diameter of the down tube, the bottom bracket, the top tube, the dropouts are unique to this, and the fork is, and obviously the gusset. Yeah, and I don't want to underestimate, Bob's design work with this really, but the point I'm trying to make is, it wasn't like we had 78-degree head tube angles, and these have got like 70 or something. Do you know what I mean? The geometry and everything was really, really similar, and obviously the material and everything was the same.
But I suppose it's an evolution. It's an evolution thing.
Well, the fact that it says freestyle on it, and this bike isn't for racing. It's freestyle. Just for doing freestyle. Yeah. So that was the big change. And then after this, both with Harrow and with other brands as well, he kind of went crazy. He got a lot. They were like shit. And also, BMX was coming. By the time we got to 1986. BMX was starting to run out of steam, and the companies that had employed all these people, and there was all these tracks, and the sport had been booming, was starting to recede again. So we had loads of stuff flipping welded on, didn't we? Like standing things on the back and standing platforms on the top tube, and welded on pegs on the bottom of the forks, and all these other kinds of things. And then obviously we had the gyro detangler brake system, which was a big game changer. Well,
again, in freestyle, definitely. I think if there was a freestyle here, he'd say that's the big one. Yeah. To allow you to spin the bars around. I mean, you can see straight away with this, as soon as you spin these bars around, all the cables are going to wrap up. Where with a modern freestyle bike, but again, and they're still current.
Yep. Even mountain bikers are using them.
Yes. Yeah. So and again, it's going back to these shifts in technology that make things work. They just work better. So yeah, Harrow Freestyler, great, very collectible. You mentioned Charlotte then, so can we hear a little bit about Charlotte and obviously her achievements?
Amazing. Came from the scooter world. She had a bike. We set up a total, I think it was, here for a few years ago, and just amazing success story with her. Really, she's got an amazing head on her shoulders. She's a little bit older than some of the other girls that were there, so I think that really helped her. I know it isn't on iPlayer now, but I'm sure it's on YouTube. If you watch that 15-minute clip and you watch her 2 runs and watch her crash on the first one and get up and do it again, that's one of the greatest moments I've seen in sport.
To not change.
Still do it. To be able to do that 360 backflip or Zach flip. And crash. She hooked up a tyre on the coping when she landed, and it knocked her off. And then to have to go round and do the second run and then do it again.
Yes. Well, she could have possibly done an easier run. She could have possibly at that point gone, we'll settle for something less. She obviously...
And she'd have got a silver medal, and I think that's what... funnily enough, there are a lot of parallels between what she did at the Olympics and what Sinead's did, in Beijing in 2008.
Yes.
You know, Sinead was so far ahead of, you know, all the other women at that point, and she was born to do that. And the Olympic timing was just so great.
Yes.
But unfortunately, she went into the last corner, threw everything at it.
Yeah.
You know, in hindsight, she did second, silver medal.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Kai now with a silver medal. He's not done bad, has he, out
No.
of silver? Do you know what I mean? But I've still got loads of respect for her to, you know, try and make a move in the last turn to be able to get a gold. Unfortunately, it didn't pay off. So those are two sides of the same coin, really.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean, unfortunately, Sinead didn't get 2 shots at that. You know, where
No.
Charlotte did.
Yeah, but you could say, you know, with Charlotte, she'd have still done an amazing run, and she would have got silver.
Yes.
And she wouldn't have done that trick. And yeah, it's only 3 years, isn't it? You know, 2.5 years now to Paris. So it would have soon come around, wouldn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but-
And then she could have a crack at it again. But you can never say that with the Olympics, can you? Because you don't know who's coming up. You can't say that you're that far ahead that you don't know who's going to be there, do you?
No, but I think going back to actually just going and doing it, I think that's very much a BMX trait. I think it's not a sport where you do tend to back off. I think it's a sport where you're on the line and you want to win. I mean, sometimes you find yourself in second place, sometimes you find yourself in last place, but you do tend to give it everything when you can, and if there's an opportunity, you'll take it. So Sinead,
maybe more in racing, maybe than
Yeah.
with free, because I mean, I don't know. I think she was always going to do it, because I don't know if you know, but they replicated that. It was amazing. They actually replicated that track in Telford. So British Cycling got the Telford International Centre,
the park.
Yeah,
It was
and from aerial photographs, built that course, and they practiced on it for weeks before they went out to Tokyo. It was aerial, so they didn't know how actually tall.
Yeah.
So maybe they could calculate the transition to an extent, but they didn't know how high they were.
Yes.
So she said it was familiar when she got there and went out in practice.
Yes.
But yeah, it was different.
The transitions would be different.
It was different as well. So I think she had that run in her mind, and that's what she was going to do.
Yeah.
Because if she took that trick out, what could you have done?
Yeah.
You could have just done a backflip, but it wouldn't have given her enough points. And if she'd only done the 360 backflip and then didn't complete the rest of the run, I think she did she do a tail whip?
The rest of the run was pretty decent.
Yeah, so if she didn't do those other things on top of that,
It wouldn't have been enough.
It wouldn't have been enough in itself.
No, a one-trick pony, it needed more.
Yeah, so it has to be. It has to be like that. But honestly, if you've not check if it's on YouTube, it's like 15 minutes, and I said this to her, and Disney can't write this shit, right? Honestly, it's like her and Hannah and the whole thing. It was it was such a battle, and and then Hannah went out and did what she did, and everybody's still, everyone's good, aren't they? And everyone wants everyone to do well, but honestly, the amount of tension, I've watched it so many times, and every time I'm like, it's pretty amazing, isn't it?
It is.
And you can say the same thing, with the racing. I mean,
well, I got up early to watch the racing. We were actually on holiday at the time, and I got up with the kids, 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever time it was, I don't even know. Unbelievable. It was unreal. It was just, I felt, even though for me there's a huge disconnect with the years, I just got a feeling of being there. I just got a feeling of actually being there and wanting it to happen. But realistically, I could see Beth definitely. This is prior to the heats and prior to the racing. I could see Beth, making the main. I could see Kai. Bearing in mind we only had 2 athletes there. We had a female athlete and a male athlete. And again, that's there's reasons for that. But just to put 1 athlete in each class and expect anything is a big ask. But I could see them, I could see finals in both of them. But incredible, just incredible. The whole, again, like you mentioned, the story. It was like seeing a story unfold. But especially for Beth, because she was just unstoppable. It was just like, it was her time. It was just...
Yeah, I mean, Perron, she's just a monster, isn't she?
Oh,
do you know what I mean? I mean, that next to last straight, I'm like, she's got to come past her here. Do you know what I mean? I'm just like, you've seen, how many BMX races have we seen? Like a lot of BMX races, and I'm like, and then they get into the last turn, and then she's got momentum. So it isn't like, obviously, I can't express it. It's, you get anyone who gets, makes the Olympics and gets an Olympic medal and then gets a gold medal, no matter whether they're doing the shooting or in the back of the bobsleigh or whatever they are, it's still a massive accolade and an achievement.
Yes. Yeah.
But to see that against a woman who's, dominated the sport for the last few years, and he's just, and, the size of her as well, Perron, she hasn't, I don't think she even does squats, does she? Do you know what I mean?
It's an interest. The body shape is really interesting. If you look at both, elite men, elite female, there isn't, the sport hasn't, where other games, runners, pretty much they're similar, sprinters,
different distances.
But BMX, that hasn't happened. And, I think there's a few reasons for that, but you see basically all shapes and sizes. You see people with real power, and then you see people, like you said, Pahom, who,
can spin or finesse and with the jumps.
Skill, skill, you can get a really powerful rider who's not necessarily as skillful, or you can get a really, really skillful rider and they can overcome the power disadvantage purely in the fact of the skill, and they can maintain track speed because of the skill. And that's interesting. That makes it interesting in itself. Beth's obviously very strong, but her skill level just seemed to peak for me. She was just incredibly skillful too. Down the first straight, she was just unstoppable. It was incredible to watch. But,
so how many Olympians have you sponsored, Alan?
Well, we sponsored Cine's, and that would be when it was Beijing 2018, and this is the first time that we've had the freestyle's been in the Olympics this time, and although we don't sponsor Kai, we used to sponsor Kai, and
so you helped him along his journey.
And you could. It's easy to be able to say now, you can tell, but Kai and Sinead were a couple that you could tell, couldn't you? I think. Do you know what I mean? And in that time period, in between 2008 and 2021, there's been a lot of riders that have been, it's definitely them, and it's not worked out, unfortunately. But I'd just like to touch on something that John said about when Kai did what he did. When Kai was watching Beth and he was shouting from the sidelines, we were all there. We were all there at that moment. And I wrote something about this, got upset about it, which I'm going to do now. But they did it for everybody who's been involved in BMX from all those years. So whether they know it or not, we were all shared in a part of it, didn't we?
It's amazing. It's amazing how, you can be involved in a sport for so long like Alan, and yet still feel that emotion, that finish line, that whole thing is incredible. It's and yet Kai was just laughing and joking, wasn't he? And he was doing what Kai does.
How does it feel for you guys to be part of the beginning of the sport, to then see two generations next door, or the next generation actually racing at an Olympic level and taking the sport, to that?
Well, like Alan said, it was, for me to be up early in the morning especially watching the racing, I felt like I was there. You know, obviously it runs deep, I guess. But we know, you know, what they've gone through to get there to that point, because it didn't happen by luck. You know, it's like, I mean, you sponsored Kai, was he 12, 13 years old?
I think he's maybe younger than that. He's probably 10 or 11. It was probably 2007 or 2007 season, I think.
Yeah, so although, you know, Kai's still relatively young, he's a young sportsman, he's certainly got some years left in him in BMX, but he's been riding for a long time. You know, he's been riding, you know, he's been riding
Well,
since...
he hadn't started then, he'd been racing for a few years before.
Yeah, so he's been, you know, he's been racing for a long, long time, so to get that good, it wasn't like chance or luck, he certainly earned it, and I think that's what we appreciate is when you see that, you know what's gone into it, you know the effort, you know the injuries, you know the travel, you know the letdowns, the disappointments, and then suddenly it just comes good at that level. And just incredible.
Well, and Declan as well, you know, a bronze medal in freestyle. So we had 4 riders win medals at the Olympics. That's like, that may never happen again. You know, hopefully it will. Hopefully it'll happen in Paris.
Well,
but it may not.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, again, obviously with both the sports, the freestyle and the racing, you know, BC put forward, you know, a male and a female rider in each one. And to medal, even just to medal, to get 1 medal from 4 riders would be incredible. You know, these riders brought on 4 medals. So, yeah, it's hard to, it would be hard to duplicate, I would say.
And I think it's hard to talk about it without getting emotional again. But I suppose it validated and it vindicated everything that we've been doing all this time. You know, me standing here and like all day for like 8 hours and still in an inner tube.
Yes. Yeah.
And you just think, why? But you know, that's why, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? So that's made it all. You know, that has made everything worthwhile. And BMX has had its ups and downs in the last 40 years. But yeah, and for all the people that, you know, that were on the programme, whether it was freestyle or whether it was racing, almost right up to, you know, Tokyo, you know, Kyle Evans, some of the freestyle riders who were Liam Phillips, you know, a lot of amazing riders that were on the programme, that it should have been their time, and one reason or another, and not necessarily, you know, their fault, because there's so many different factors and injuries and all different things, and how the whole thing works. I don't even know how it works. Do you know what I mean? Hopefully they can see. Hopefully I'm sure they'll all be really proud and pleased to see what's happened this year in Tokyo. It was so enormous, and to see. I mean, our neighbours were talking about it, and the people on our local WhatsApp neighbourhood group were all on about it. Yeah. Did you see that thing? Yeah. It was amazing.
But it was amazing, wasn't it?
And then to see them all on the cover, you know, of the newspapers the next day. I mean, I know somebody sent Charlotte a video. They just went down to the paper shop and they just videoed all the papers, and she was just on the cover of every single newspaper. And obviously, you know, they didn't come back straight away, did they? So there was a delay before they knew how
big,
monumental it was. I think the race is different because of that community, and you know, Peckham was on TV and all that, weren't they? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think they realised how much it had affected the nation, and you don't really get that so much, do you? So I think BMX was definitely the star of the Olympics this time, whether it was racing or whether it was freestyle. And to most people, and this is really cool actually, to most people it's just, that BMX, which one? Or the one on the, they were both good. You know, it's almost come full circle, because to the person that's never seen the sport before, they were still on those little bikes going up in the air, whether it was freestyle or whether it was racing, you know. So,
I agree.
Both were equally, I think they were both equally as good to watch, and certainly for me, they were both amazing in their own way.
Gosh, yes, yeah.
Where do you see the future?
I don't see any major change in bike development. I mean, I don't really see BMX having a major shift. I mean, we've discussed, other possibilities, but I think BMX has developed to the point now where it's so ingrained. There are so many, and this is great. There are so many clubs in the country, very accessible clubs. You can just go to. The helps there. You can just very easy to pick the sport up and ride. So I don't see that changing. Tracks are the way they are for various reasons. Tarmac berms, again, we've discussed. But one of the reasons for tarmac berms as well is low maintenance. These BMX tracks, they take a lot of, upkeep. All volunteers on the whole, mums and dads. So anything that can make it easier to run and to keep decent quality tracks. So tarmac berms are here to stay. So I don't see any major shift. I think what I have seen more these last few years are the standard of riding now is incredible. You go to a national BMX race and it is unbelievable. From little Bobby, who's 6 years old, right through to elite, it's incredible. But to maintain that standard of riding, you've got to practice. You've got to train. We used to ride a bit and train, but probably not much. But now, unless you're at that level where you're riding multiple times a week, training, coaching, and I see this, all the big clubs, they've all got coaches. So I see moving forward the way it is. I see, hopefully the whole Olympic movement, the results and the freestyle has brought it to the public's eye. I've certainly seen at the track a lot of novices. A lot of novice riders have started out, and it's the novices that come through.
Yeah, I think it's the infrastructure. The infrastructure is going to improve, and hopefully the sport, both with freestyle, I know British Cycling have said this, and with racing, they will get more grassroots facilities. Which is still what we need. So I think infrastructure. Only really 10, certainly not 20 years ago, we didn't have coaches like like Dylan Clayton and people like that. We didn't have that. So people who used to ride at a good level and are good at communicating, technique, listening to, watching a rider and being able to identify what they're doing. Yeah. We didn't have none of that shit then, did we? No. Do you know what I mean? Well, it was literally you had to pedal the bike, and it was more about. And to be honest, John, it was more about pedaling the bike. There were jumps, but the skill side of it, and I know you showed quite more of that off probably than I did. But at the end of the day, if you could pedal, if you had a lot of power in your legs and you could get a good start, you were pretty much good to go. You'd occasionally come across a track that'd be difficult, and going to the freestyle side of it in terms of words. I guess things just go bigger, don't they? So if you look at skateboarding and the mega ramp, and if you look at people like Kieran Riley, the up and comers now who are going to, probably going to be pushing to be in the Olympics in Paris, double whips, triple whip, double back, all these. There were PlayStation tricks, 10 years ago, and now these kids are doing them. Yes. And you also see. How are they doing that at that age? Skateboarding too. But it's because it just becomes normalised, doesn't it? For them to see someone doing that.
You can do it.
Yeah, there's no reason why you couldn't. I mean, for us to be able to visualise a 360, 40 years ago, it was it took some flipping imagination, didn't it? And never mind it, and it doesn't seem long ago, when we had the first backflip. And I remember seeing the first front flip on a BMX bike, and that was probably less than 20 years ago on a Fox video, and that was absolutely mind-blowing. And the other thing that we need to mention and give a shout out is how far women's BMX has come.
Oh,
I mean, with racing, yes, but you know, no disrespect to the people who were racing against Sinead, but Sinead was in a, you know, you can't even really say this stuff now, can you? Sinead was just in a different category, you know, riding much more like the lads.
Well, I think again, it's interesting you say that, Alan, because again, I'm going to the races and I'm seeing this, but the girls. The standard of riding of the girls is incredible. The speed.
Well, but before they'd be like, you'd have more of them rolling jumps, but now, you know, the doubling stuff, they wouldn't be manually, or, you know, the front ends would be dropped. But none of that now.
No, it's all.
So the disparity between, and I think with freestyle, they've still got some catching up to do because, you know, I don't know why, and it's something that I remember, you know, 10 years ago, you know, thinking, well, when BMX Freestyle was going through a bit of a dip, you know, why haven't we got more? You know, we've got females in BMX racing.
Yes.
Why haven't we got them in BMX Freestyle?
Yeah.
And there was virtually none. It was really niche. Women of freestyle. There was a few other groups doing it, but it was not mainstream. But it was the same with skateboarding. But now, you know, there are more female skateboarders. You know, we sell more skateboards to girls than we do lads, and we have done for like a while. And I guess it's just...
It's a movement, isn't it?
Yeah, so that it's, you know, like with Charlotte, and I don't know if you've seen the British cycling video that
Absolutely
they put out. And that, I mean, apart from the girl watching it, we were all going way more apeshit than that. That could have, you know, but when... but that's exactly what we always hoped that the Olympics would do. Someone would see that and say... I mean, we all wanted to get out on a bike and ride. Who didn't? Like you were just so stoked on BMX, but with the freestyle, you know, I think Charlotte's really pushed it, and I think having come from scooters has really helped because a lot of that motion is already there.
Yes.
So yeah, hopefully that gap will be, the gap is narrowing. In a way, I'm glad that women's freestyle had that extra year because of COVID, because they got so much better in that 12 months.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? I don't think she'd have been doing that.
It wouldn't have looked the same
a
year previous.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't have. You know, and all the women who were in the final were all amazing.
Yes.
And if you just like follow somebody, Nikita De Caros on Instagram, you see their riding since the Olympics, and you know, and the Russian woman as well. It's just
improving.
Whoa, you're like, wait a minute, we're only like 6 months from the Olympics, and they've already gone so much further. So I think women's freestyle's got a lot to go. With the men's, I don't know. For me, 3 whips, 4 whips, double, triple backflip. I don't know. You know, and again, it's only when you've been watching it a long time, and John will know what I mean here. You see somebody that's just got such great style.
Yeah.
It isn't just about being able to do...
It's not just technicality.
No, you see the Nitro Circus stuff, and I know people love that stuff, and it's got a niche, but I don't know. For me, once someone's spinning the bike around so many times, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5... You can't even...
You can't count it.
You can't even really count it, so hopefully the freestyle side will, you know, people will appreciate what, you know, the found Matt Hoffman and the people like that really set a standard for the sport, and it was beyond how many rotations there were.
Well,
so hopefully it's down to the judges.
It's down to the judges. I mean, what Alan's saying as well, it's flow, it's style and flow. But it is down to the judges. The judges will award points for this, award points for that, and if we're not careful, I think it will just get down to how many spins, how many whips, you know, and really, I think it becomes less, for me, the aesthetic starts going. You know, when it starts becoming
style and grace.
Yes, you know, I think sometimes less is more. But hey, you know, we're not judges, and I don't know how they even judge these things.
I think they've got to have had that conversation, and I think you know, now that the rotation numbers, once the rotation numbers start going past 3,
Yeah.
I'm sure they've had this discussion, and
They
they're now
must.
talking about we need to skew this so it's something that someone's got something, and it might be indefinable. It's got to be a hard job, though, hasn't it?
Oh.
Judging the racing's not so bad, is it?
Well,
you go to the finish line. Wait a minute, we'll look at the camera if it was close.
And that's it, yeah.
That's it,
Well,
so it's got to be hard.
Yeah, but it's not subjective. I mean, you know, freestyle is obviously judging, it's subjective, so, it will always be so. But I still think style and flow make it for me, for sure.
If you were both teenagers, do you think you'd be racing today?
I probably would. Yeah, I'd be on a bar like that, I think. I'd be, you know, if I didn't smash myself to pieces, I'd be, I think I'd be looking at the 8-metre hills, and because you just do the sport now, you know, with, you know, my children, I think they've seen some old videos of me on tracks, and they just go, what is that? They just, you know, and so, yeah, I think I'd just be in their shoes. I think, you know, I'd be in clipless shoes, and I think I'd be doing that, I think. Because again, the sport's moved on, it's bigger, faster, and that's, you know, that's what we're aiming for in the day, really. But it's just come on, you know, it's just come on to the point where now this is how you do that. You know, you don't go around dirt corners with your foot out anymore. You know, it's, I suppose, you know, there are other sports where you can do that. 4-cross, Alan mentioned, you know, but downhill mountain biking, you know, that's another sport possibly. That obviously.
It's be on 2 wheels and pedals.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that wasn't obviously, you know, downhill mountain biking wasn't around then. So that's another sport. So probably 2 wheels and pedals of one description or another.
I think we'd always we'd come from bikes, hadn't we? Whatever, you know, we'd had choppers or whatever bike we'd had, and we'd always had bikes, hadn't we, before BMX of some description, hadn't we? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah,
and obviously
yeah.
I was, you know, racing motocross as well. But I don't know, I think there was an element of it being a bike and that being so cool, and also with it being new, you know.
Yeah,
and I know John's been fortunate of being at the start of like supermoto over here and snowboard, flat track,
yeah.
supermoto, snowboarding, right at the birth of these sports that are now massive. And to be there at the beginning when no one knows what the hell they're doing.
Yeah, it's a good point, that.
They're the really...
The pioneers.
Yeah, and those moments, I mean, fast forward 50, 100 years, whatever, people will still, you know, this type of bike is still going to be revered, and that time is still going to be a golden era because it's, you know...
It was the start.
Where it started. And like I say, for us, we kind of missed out. We missed the kind of ugly bit of, do we need suspension? Do we need this? Do we need that? By the time we got BMX, it was kind of funny formed, wasn't it, really?
Yes.
You know, by the time we got these, we had tubular 3-piece cranks.
Well, the bikes worked.
Yeah, before we had that, we either had to use a 1-piece crank, which bent, or an alloy road-derived, you know, Shimano-style 3-piece crank, with a square taper bottom bracket, which also
bent and creaked.
So we were lucky, really, that BMX only came to these shores when it was, you know, we had brands and it was all working.
Yeah, they were purposeful. Yeah, they were. You could get on them and ride them. Set them up and ride them, and they worked.
I know what John's saying, but I suspect that we'd probably be doing
something else
weird other thing that was probably like to do with bikes. Do you not think that it would be
Maybe.
like
something new?
Yeah, because that was always that's always been an appeal, and we've been fortunate, and John more so than me being at something right at the start. You know, I mean, I went up a few times. I went to Aviemore, and David made a snowboard, and it's before they even banned snowboards, because later they banned snowboards, didn't they?
Yes.
When we had them, they didn't know what
they
didn't know what they were.
Well, I remember again, Dave Arnold, but I remember we went to a local dry ski slope, and they wouldn't let us on. They said, "What are those?" That's how new it was. You go to a dry ski slope now, with a snowboard.
Well, those first boards, you couldn't buy them. They were Dave built it, made
Oh
it.
yeah,
didn't he?
well, the very early boards, yeah. I mean, we were making boards way before you could do production boards. Again, we're going off on a tangent now, but again, it's about starting something and getting involved with something at such early days, and then obviously seeing it through to the point where you do have rideable boards and you can sort of have fun and benefit.
Before edges, we found out edges. That's how that was for next game of snowboard work.
Yeah, but then it's a lot of fun. I think I don't think being a pioneer is probably the correct word, but just being right at the cusp of the start of a sport, and this is where we were. This is where we were with these. You know, it was in this country especially. You know, it was right at the start, and it was a lot of fun.
Absolutely amazing. Well, unless you guys have got any more to say, I'd just like to thank Alan for giving up his evening tonight.
Thank you.
Telling us all about it, and John for coming out and getting all nostalgic with his bikes.
Hey,
had to dust it off.
I don't think we'll finish tonight off with you two having a race.
One thing I forgot to point out is this bike from 1982 and Jason's bike have both got handlebars made by Renthal in Stockport.
Yes, indeed.
So yeah, that's
quite incredible.
Yeah, they're going very strong in the mountain biking industry now, Renthal as well.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, a brilliant success story. Yeah.
No, that is absolutely amazing. Again, thank you, Alan, for the shop, and thank you, John, for leading the conversation there.
Yeah, and thank you, Dan, from Random Adventure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.